The whole mind and purpose of the power that wielded them was now bent with overwhelming force upon the mountain. At his summons, wheeling with a rending cry, in a last desperate race there flew, faster than the winds, the Nazgul, the Ringwraiths, and with a storm of wings they hurtled southwards to Mount Doom. I am the Lord of the Rings, Frodo thought to himself, his mind twisted by the evil of the One, here on March 25th of 3019. Frodo, the Ring-Bearer, had fallen. Turning towards the entrance of Sammath Naur and Mount Doom, he saw Sam get assaulted by a quick figure, Gollum. Frodo moved to draw Sting from its sheath at Sam's side, evading Gollum's hands. With a sudden, invisible dash, Mercy left the heart of Frodo, and he cut Smeagol down. The screams of Gollum echoed through the mountain of fire as the elvish blade finally took his life. Frodo regarded Sam once again, and for an instant, one moment, his heart turned to the will of the Ring-Bearer who began this journey. All the suffering, the pain, the death. He could end it here and now. But the voice that said such things was only a whisper now, and Frodo Baggins was too broken to avert the will of Sauron, the will of the One Ring. He made ready to leave the mountain and hoped Sam could find his way to survive. No, Frodo's thought turned to what he imagined would be his dominion. The bearers of the other rings of power, he could feel them in his heart, but he knew he could not dominate their minds. Rather, he would return to the Shire as a king, the first king of the halflings, one who showed the other races just how powerful hobbits truly could be. But as Frodo gazed out towards the northwest, he beheld 8 winged shapes flying towards him. Fear took hold. There was a pain in his shoulder, where he had been pierced by Morgul's steel. They were almost upon him. The hobbit began to fight within himself, as he knew even with the One Ring he could not defeat the Nazgul, but he was not strong enough to destroy the ring either. Khamûl, the next in line as the captain of the Nazgul after the Witch King, found the hobbit just inside the entrance of Sammath Naur, the ring on his finger. Khamûl reached out his gauntlet, the will of Sauron almost fulfilled, and in that hour Frodo attempted to use the One Ring to dominate the minds of the Nazgul. But their power was greater than his, as was the original power of Sauron. Frodo's mind and will broke, and the ring fell into the hands of the Nazgul, who took both Frodo and Sam to the Houses of Lamentation for torture during what remained of their lives. Khamûl brought the ring with great haste to Barad-dûr and the throne of Sauron, who watched with his Ithiel stone, a palantir. Khamûl knelt and presented the One Ring to he who had lost it thousands of years before. Sauron donned his ring, and across the world all could feel the turn of the tide, the impending doom that was to come. Gandalf, who was himself at the Black Gate, immediately took off the Ring of Fire Narya, lest his mind could be dominated by Sauron. His friends, the men of Gondor and Rohan, fought and died around him. Gandalf looked at Aragorn and placed his hand on the man's shoulder. Elisar knew what had happened. Gwaihir landed next to Gandalf, and Aragorn nodded his head towards the Great Eagle. Go, my friend. I will stand and fall alongside my kin. I will not flee, and will fall as Elendil the Tall did. But you must tell the West that we have lost. Make haste, save Arwen, and deliver my love to her. With that, Aragorn gave Gandalf the Elisar Stone and hugged the old man. Before leaving the battlefield, Gandalf would surely take Pippin with him. Gandalf mounted Gwaihir and fled from the field as he wept. He cried for that parting, for the doom of his friends, for the ends of Frodo and Sam, and for the failure of his quest and the end of the world that was to come. Those who saw the Eagle and White Rider leave the Morannon knew their end was nigh. Gandalf made for North Anorion, where went Elfhelm, one of the last lords of the Rohirrim, as to tell him and his men to retreat into their castles and homes, and to prepare for the end. Gandalf would then go on to deliver this news to Minas Tirith, and to pick up Merry as well. Elfhelm would make his way back to Rohan. Gandalf would then go to Lothlorien with his hobbits. Galadriel, who had sensed the ring's return to Sauron, had taken off Nenya, and already the forest was beginning to dwindle and fade, its borders made unsafe. As for Sauron, his strength returned, and he strode forth from Barad-dûr, already arrogant with this new power, that which had returned to him. He commanded his armies to destroy the Free Peoples at the Black Gate, and to bring him the King of Gondor. Aragorn was thus brought to him at the slopes of Mount Doom, where Sauron drew forth Anduril and broke it like Narsil, crushing Aragorn's spirit before torturing and slaying him. Like Celebrimbor, the body of Aragorn, the last heir of Elendil, would adorn a banner for his armies, as they strode forth with a new strength back into the heartlands of Middle-earth. Now we know that, most fundamentally in the Lord of the Rings story, all Sauron needed was the One Ring to cover all the lands in a second darkness. He of course would do this, but let's explore how he would, what this would change, and what the true outcome would be of this story, as I don't necessarily believe the world would end in darkness. Sauron would start with the land of his latest failure, Gondor. His armies from Mordor immediately made for the White City, going through Osgiliath, and no one of true strength would stand in his way. Faramir, the last steward who waited for his king's return, saw Aragorn return indeed, just as Sauron had fashioned for him too. As the many servants of Sauron, orcs, evil men, and others marched to Gondor, Sauron spent strength and will to recall the Lord of the Nazgul from death, his greatest servant, as Nazgul cannot suffer permanent death while the ring and Sauron yet remained. The Witch King and the others led a new assault, which saw Minas Tirith and those with it razed to the ground. The White Tree was burned, the destruction so total on the city that the West knew great fear. Sauron came himself amongst the wreckage and sat upon the throne of Gondor, to insult the memory of the Númenóreans, before his evil eye turned north towards Lothlorien. Speaking of the Golden Wood, Gandalf held council with Galadriel and Celeborn, who prepared to ride for the Gap of Rohan and the Grey Havens afterwards. Their time to leave this Middle-earth had come, and while they had fought against the evils of Morgoth and Sauron, they were, in the end, bested. Now all they could do is help protect the Elven Rings and bear them into the West. Gandalf would go with them, bearing the news of their defeat into Rohan and abroad. Meanwhile, the Easterlings broke the strength of Dale and Erebor, and the dwarves of Middle-earth were ultimately defeated, except for those refugees in the wilderness and those in the arid Luin. Dol Guldur defeated Thranduil and Mirkwood. The darkness of Sauron spread, and he made his way north from Minas Tirith to Lothlorien, relishing in the burning of the Golden Wood, slaying and enslaving any and all free peoples he saw. Gandalf, Galadriel, and the others went to Edoras and Helm's Deep, meeting with Erkenbrand and Elfhelm once again, the last leaders of the Rohirrim who prepared their people for the final battle at Helm's Deep. Gandalf, ahead of the others on Shadowfax, went to Isengard to tell Treebeard that the West had been defeated, and Fangorn Forest would soon burn. The imprisonment of Saruman was given over to Gandalf, as the Ents made their way back into their forest. The responsibility of Saruman and Wormtongue were thus given to Gandalf and his company, and Gandalf offered him mercy and a chance at redemption, which Saruman spat upon. Gandalf left them in the tower until Sauron would find them. Gandalf and the others then rode on towards Rivendell, coming through Eregion and beholding the wreckage Sauron had wrought during the age that came before, and they knew that this would be the fate of all the free peoples. They came to Rivendell and Elrond, who was already aware of all that had happened, as he had taken off his ring Vilya. His people were prepared to make haste for the Havens, and Arwen had already been sent there, even as all mourned the sure deaths of Eladon and Elrohir and Estelle in the south. Elrond and the others went on to the Grey Havens, and Gandalf had to deliver the news of Frodo's demise to Bilbo, whose guilt was immense and unbearable, as he had been the one to pass the ring on to Frodo. Bilbo, Pippin, and Merry all mourned together as they joined Gandalf in going further west. At this time, the darkness swept over the Misty Mountains in Rohan, heading northwest, and Sauron, knowing that many elves were likely leaving Middle-earth, made haste himself towards the harbors in the Grey Havens. While his armies had met some resistance in Fangorn, and the Ents did fight back, they were not immune to fire. Gandalf and the others passed through the southern part of the Shire, and their hearts broke for the halflings who suffered under Saruman's lackeys. Pippin and Merry, whose wills were nearly broken, stayed and helped their people resist while they could, as they would not be welcomed in the uttermost west. So indeed this company of Gandalf, Bilbo, Elrond, Glorfindel, Galadriel, Celeborn, and many others went and met with Círdan, Arwen, and any others who remained at the Grey Havens. They held the last meeting of the White Council and mourned for the loss of Middle-earth, their final defeat. Elrond seemed in some ways most affected by this. My father, Eärendil the Mariner, and my mother Elwing had saved elves and men in the Elder Days, yet now the clouds of shadow, the dawnless day, separate them from us. I must try to do as they did. When we reach Valinor, as a half-elf, I shall plead for aid from the Valar. I shall plead on behalf of men mostly, the choice of my brother Elros, for they have no emissary they could yet send, who could indeed reach the west. And it is their time to inherit this world. They deserve that chance. This is my purpose, and with the blessing of Eru we might save the world to bequeath it to men, as it should have always been. There was yet some hope, yet still all were sorrowful. Gandalf's fear of Sauron had beaten the wizard in the end, or so he had thought. He would still do all he could to combat Sauron, as he had another idea. And so, even as the black tide was coming in, he bade the others farewell, giving his ring back to Círdan, so that it might also go back into the west. And while the others set sail following Elrond's mission, which had been that of his father before him, Gandalf rode with all haste for the Old Forest, for the Master. He battled his way to get there, but soon he came to the house of the Moss Gatherer, Tom Bombadil and Goldberry. He told them of the fate of the world, and that Sauron's servants would soon burn the Old Forest. Tom, whose merry voice was hardly dampened by this news, said that the worries of the world were not his, but he would protect this forest, and he would do what old Tom could. For a few years after this, Sauron's dominion was entirely realized. All lands were his to rule, yet he still mostly dwelt in Mordor. Saruman was punished for his treachery of the Dark Lord, and Isengard was rebuilt for the mouth of Sauron, who governed in the Dark Lord's absence. Elves, men, dwarves, and hobbits were his slaves, and Sauron ordered the world to his will. He called himself the God King of Middle-earth. There was only one pocket of resistance to this will, the Old Forest, where Tom Bombadil, Gandalf, and Goldberry maintained their defiance against him, and his incursion. Elrond had reached Valinor some time after they had set sail, and went immediately to the Council of the Valar. He begged at the feet of Manwë that, for sake of elves, but mostly men, for the sake of all Middle-earth, the Valar needed to intervene and defeat Sauron. Manwë asked Eru Ilúvatar for counsel, for in the vision of the fate of men during the music of the Ainur, no Vala saw the doom of men and the fate of Middle-earth revealed to them. Eru said that the time of the second-born children was not yet over, and it was not yet time for the Dagor Dagorath, but the tyranny and evils of the Ainur needed to be ended finally. Sauron had now himself become like Melkor, with a greater victory than Melkor had had as Morgoth in Middle-earth. Sauron should be dealt with in the same way. And so it was as ordered by the Elder King Manwë. The people of the Valar, led by Eonwë, the herald of Manwë, were to make one last armament, and set sail east and back to Middle-earth. Perhaps even some members of the Valar like Tulkas and Arome would come too. At the very least, someone like Aule would have to come to have the strength of will and power to destroy the One Ring. With the exception of Arwen and Bilbo, all those who had sailed west took up arms with them, and the kings of the elves of the west, Ingwe, Finarfin, all made ready for war with Sauron. Eonwë announced that he had offered Sauron a chance at mercy, to return to Valinor at the end of the First Age and receive the judgment of the Valar then, but now he could not escape them. He would be brought back and cast out, just as Melkor was. And so, in the early years of that which would have been the Fourth Age, a great armament, the most powerful soldiers since the Elder Days, arrived in their ships in the western seas of Middle-earth. Sauron, in his arrogance, did not expect this, but fear took him quickly. The host of Valinor landed all along the shorelines, from Umbar to the Grey Havens, and pushed Sauron's armies back in the war for sake of Middle-earth. The Dark Lord was truly weak compared to Melkor, and within a matter of weeks, Sauron was captured in Mordor, even as he tried to go further east. Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, when the war had broken out, stayed in the Old Forest and maintained their peaceful lives. Gandalf rejoined with the others and freed Middle-earth. One of the Valar, probably Aule, seeing that he had once been the master of Sauron, took the One Ring and destroyed it with his hammer, the ring having no power over him. The host of the West, along with all the elves who would leave this Middle-earth, sailed back to Valinor, with Sauron in their grasp, leaving these shores and men forever. All of Sauron's slaves had been freed, and now it was up to them, up to men, to do with the world as they would, and to rebuild. For Middle-earth would not end in the same way as Beleriand had. For his conquest in Middle-earth, Sauron would follow his master and be exiled from Arda, beyond the Door of Night. For his victory and defeat, Sauron would join his master Melkor in the Void, suffering the same loss he had suffered, until such a time as Dagor Dagorath might occur. Middle-earth, though it had suffered greatly, was saved, and was in dire need to be rebuilt. And so we come to the end of our tale. From this theory of what if Sauron had regained the One Ring, we see that, even if evil seems inevitable, we must always keep our hope to have victory in the end. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. I really hope you enjoyed that theory. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button and share this with a friend. While it was sorrowful, it was quite amazing to craft and ponder this tale. Let me know your thoughts. Would Sauron's victory have happened like this, or some other way? Let me know in the comments below. Shout out to Nerd of the Rings' video on this topic, the game The Lord of the Rings Conquest, which explores this idea, and the Sauron Defeated book, and Tolkien's ideas before the destruction of the ring, all of which helped inspire my thoughts on this topic, even as I took it in my own direction. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons, Kyle Wetzel, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putin, Mark Kralik, Blair Scout, Merton, John Hume, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Reese Jenkins, Adam Petrulik, Brandon Glidden, Molly Sullivan, Daniel Burns, Anthony Harmon, Dorwin Gray, Arthur Merlin, and DJ Vaught, our newest Valar tier patron. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today, and I'll see you all again next week with a region spotlight on Angmar, the land of the Witch King. You all are the best, my friends. Thank you all so much for joining me in this adventure. Until the next one.